Today, we're diving into a fascinating story. It's about how a powerful set of ideas, passed down from a father to his son, ended up being forged into a full-blown national movement. We're talking about Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook and how he became the architect of an ideology that is still a huge deal in modern Israel.
So how does that even happen? How does one person, a scholar, a rabbi, become the ideological engine for one of the most powerful political and social movements in a country's entire history? That's really the core question we're going to unpack here.
Okay, so to really get the ideology, we've got to start with the man himself and the very real movement that he sparked.
So let's set the scene. It's right after the Six-Day War in 1967, and this new force just explodes onto the scene in Israel. It's called Gush Imonim, which means the Block of the Faithful. And their mission? It was crystal clear and fueled by this incredibly powerful theology. For them, settling the territories that Israel had just captured wasn't just about politics. No, it was a vital step in God's plan for redemption.
And who was the guy who built that whole theological framework? The intellectual architect behind Gush Imonim. That was Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook. His followers just called him Ratzia. And you got to understand, he wasn't just some teacher. He was literally building an entire worldview.
So how did he pull it off? Well, this wasn't some overnight revolution. Not at all. It was actually the result of this quiet, super patient, decades-long project. He was deliberately building a foundational set of texts, a canon.
Yeah, and this timeline, it really shows you his incredible dedication. His father was the famous Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook. When he died in 1935, Ratzia didn't just jump into the spotlight. Nope. For almost 20 years, he basically went into seclusion. He had one single focus, to meticulously edit and publish all of his father's huge collection of writings.
And listen, this was way more than just a son honoring his dad. For Ratzia, this was a sacred mission. He saw his father's work, like his book Orot, or Lights, as this pure flask filled with the holiest ideas you can imagine. He felt his job was to take all that and distill it down into a philosophy that was coherent, accessible, and ready to be used.
And here's the key takeaway, right? This was incredibly strategic. Ratzia knew that if you want to have a real, lasting impact on a national scale, you can't just build a movement on personality. It needs a solid, written foundation, a canon that people can actually study, argue about, and most importantly, act on.
So once that intellectual groundwork was laid, Ratzia moved on to the next, crucial phase, creating a new generation of leaders who could actually carry this ideology out into the world.
So in 1952, after all those years of quiet work, he finally stepped into a public role. He took over leadership of the Merkez Harav Yeshiva in Jerusalem. And what he did there was nothing short of transformative. He took this respected but kind of sleepy religious school and turned it into an absolute ideological powerhouse. It became the undisputed hub for the entire religious Zionist movement.
And one of his biggest innovations was championing this thing called the Hesder Yeshiva model. Now, you have to understand, this was a totally revolutionary idea back then. It was a program that combined years of intense, advanced religious study with mandatory military service in the IDF.
And the impact of this? It was massive. The Hesder model reframed military service completely. It wasn't just a civic duty anymore. It was a holy commandment, a mitzvah. So what did this do? It created this whole new elite class of soldier scholars. These guys were deeply ideological, trained for leadership, and they started rising through the ranks of the military. They were basically injecting the yeshiva's worldview right into the heart of one of Israel's most important institutions.
All right, so we've got the foundation and the leaders. Now let's get to the core of his actual philosophy and see how this theology turned directly into some pretty uncompromising political action.
Okay, so the central pillar of everything Ratzia taught was this concept called Achalta de Gula. It means the beginning of redemption. What he taught his students was that the modern state of Israel wasn't just some secular historical thing that happened. For him, it was a sacred prophetic event. It was the divinely ordained start of the final messianic redemption.
And as you can imagine, a belief like that has some serious political consequences. Here's a perfect example. After the '67 war, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan was talking about maybe giving back some of the captured territory. Ratzia's response was just absolute. He told him that Israel's control over its historic homeland was completely non-negotiable. His words were, "These things are once and for all."
And you can totally see the logic, right? If you believe that the state's existence and its control over the land is all part of a divine, messianic plan, well, then giving up any part of that land isn't just a bad political move. It's way more than that. It's seen as actively fighting against God's plan. It's a religious sin that could literally stop redemption in its tracks.
So, that raises a big question. What happens to a powerful, unified vision like this after the main architect is gone? Well, as we're about to see, the legacy he left behind is, well, it's not simple. It's incredibly complex and really diverse.
So after Ratzia died in 1982 and the Gush Emunim movement started to fracture, his ideological blueprint didn't just vanish. Not at all. It evolved. It started branching out into all these different and, yeah, sometimes conflicting schools of thought.
And this chart does a really good job of showing just how diverse things got. Okay, so first you have the mainstream statist camp. They basically carry on the original idea. The state is a sacred tool for redemption. Then you've got the Haredi national stream, connected to Rabbi Tau. They think the state is divine, but its secular politics are impure, so they advocate for more separation from secular culture. Then, moving in a more radical direction, you have the anti-statist stream. Thinkers like Rabbi Ginsburg see the modern state as an impure shell that eventually needs to be broken to let the real holy kingdom emerge. And then there's a totally different direction, the peace-oriented path from people like Rabbi Froman. His whole idea was that the land is actually holier than the state, which led him to a theology focused on dialogue and coexistence.
And all of this really leaves us with a huge fundamental question. The story of Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook is this incredible case study of how ideas can literally shape reality. But it also shows us something else. Once you turn a theology into a political blueprint, what happens next is anyone's guess. Its evolution becomes unpredictable. It leads to this complex legacy of conflict, but also creativity, and just constant reinterpretation. And the question of what happens next, well, that's a question that's still being answered on the ground every single day.